November 29th, 1864. Dawn breaks over the Colorado plains. The temperature hovers near freezing. In a peaceful village along Sand Creek, Cheyenne and Arapaho families sleep beneath buffalo hide lodges, unaware that in less than an hour, 675 American soldiers will descend upon them and commit one of the most horrific war crimes in United States history. This isn't a story about warfare. This is a story about murder, mutilation, betrayal, and how men celebrated as heroes became monsters. The man who ordered this massacre? Colonel John Chivington, a Methodist minister, a proclaimed abolitionist, a man once considered a candidate for Congress. He told his troops, "Kill and scalp all, big and little. Nits make lice." By noon, over 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho people lay dead in the frozen creek bed. 2/3 of them were women, children, and elderly. Pregnant women were sliced open. Infants were clubbed to death. Body parts were taken as trophies and displayed in Denver saloons. This is the Sand Creek Massacre, a story America tried to forget, a wound that has never healed, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest atrocities aren't committed by our enemies, but by those who claim to be our protectors. This is that story. To understand Sand Creek, we must first understand the promises that were broken. For thousands of years, the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations thrived across the Great Plains. Their territory stretched from the Black Hills to the Arkansas River, millions of acres of grassland, buffalo herds, and sacred grounds. Then came 1858. Gold was discovered near present-day Denver. Within months, over 100,000 prospectors flooded into Cheyenne and Arapaho territory. They called it Pike's Peak or bust, but for the indigenous peoples who had lived there for generations, it was an invasion. Buffalo were slaughtered, sacred sites were desecrated, violence erupted. In 1861, under enormous pressure, Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders signed the Treaty of Fort Wise. They surrendered millions of acres in exchange for a small reservation and promises of protection. Chief Black Kettle, a peace leader, believed the treaty would save his people. He was told, "Follow the white man's road and you will be safe." But the promises were lies. The reservation land was barren. Rations promised by the government never arrived. Starvation set in. Meanwhile, Colorado's territorial governor, John Evans, needed a political victory. He wanted to become a state governor, and he saw opportunity in conflict. Evans began spreading rumors of Indian uprisings. He exaggerated isolated incidents into a full-blown war scare. Newspapers published inflammatory stories. Fear swept through Denver, and Evans found his enforcer, Colonel John Milton Chivington, a 6'4", 250-pound former minister who had earned fame fighting Confederates in New Mexico. Chivington wanted glory. Evans wanted power. Together, they would orchestrate a massacre. John Chivington was no ordinary soldier. Born in Ohio in 1821, he became a Methodist minister, a man of God who preached salvation and righteousness. When the Civil War began, he traded his Bible for a saber and led Union troops to victory at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in 1862, helping save New Mexico from Confederate control. They called him the Fighting Parson. But ambition consumed him. By 1864, his military commission was expiring. He hadn't achieved the legendary status he craved. Colorado still wasn't a state, and Chivington believed one more military victory, one spectacular triumph over the Indian threat, would make him a legend. He assembled the 3rd Colorado Cavalry Regiment, the 100 Daysers, mostly volunteers with little military training, men who had signed up for 100 days of service, men who wanted action, and Chivington promised them blood.
At recruiting rallies, he declared, "The Cheyennes will have to be soundly whipped before they will be quiet. I say that if any of them are caught in your vicinity, kill them." By autumn 1864, Black Kettle's band was camped at Sand Creek, about 40 miles northeast of Fort Lyon. They had been explicitly told to camp there by U.S. officials. They flew an American flag above Black Kettle's lodge, a symbol of peace. They believed they were under federal protection. Black Kettle had even traveled to Denver to negotiate peace.
But Chivington saw opportunity. On November 28th, he gathered his troops and announced, "We're going to attack the village at dawn. Take no prisoners." Some officers objected. Captain Silas Soule refused to participate, calling it murder. Chivington's response? "Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians." The stage was set for slaughter. November 29th, 1864, 6:30 a.m. The sun has not yet risen. 675 soldiers surround the sleeping village. Women and children huddle in lodges, wrapped in buffalo robes against the cold. About 750 Cheyenne and Arapaho people are in camp. Most are non-combatants. Black Kettle has sent the warriors away to hunt buffalo. Suddenly, the thunder of hooves. Black Kettle rushes from his lodge. He raises the American flag high. Beneath it, he ties a white flag of surrender. He shouts to his people, "Do not be afraid. The soldiers will not hurt us. We are under protection." He believed until the very last moment that the promises would hold. Then the shooting begins. Howitzer cannons roar. Rifle fire tears through the lodges. Families scramble from their beds. Mothers grab children. Elders cry out in confusion. Black Kettle screams, "Stop! We are peaceful!" But his voice is drowned by the storm of violence. What happened next defies comprehension. This was not combat. This was execution. Women waving white cloths were shot down. Children were hunted like animals. Pregnant women were bayoneted, their unborn children cut from their bodies. Soldiers scalped the living and the dead. They took body parts, genitalia, fingers, ears as souvenirs. One soldier later testified he saw a soldier cut out a woman's private parts and stretch them over his saddle. Survivors tried to flee to the creek bed, digging pits in the sand with their bare hands. Soldiers pursued them. For 8 hours, the killing continued. Captain Soule, true to his word, ordered his men not to fire. They watched in horror as their fellow soldiers committed atrocities. By 2 p.m., the gunfire ceased. Over 230 Cheyenne and Arapaho lay dead. Estimates suggest 200 of them were women, children, and elderly. 9 chiefs were killed. Black Kettle survived, one of the few. His wife, though shot 9 times, also survived. As soldiers looted and burned the village, the survivors fled into the freezing plains with nothing. Many more would die from exposure in the days that followed. And the bodies left behind were mutilated beyond recognition. On December 7, 1864, Colonel John Chivington returned to Denver, a hero. His troops paraded through the streets, displaying scalps, severed fingers, and genitalia on poles. A theater performance was interrupted so Chivington could take the stage and display trophies to a cheering crowd. Newspapers hailed it as a great victory. The Rocky Mountain News proclaimed, "Cheyenne scalps are getting as thick here now as toads in Egypt. Everybody has got one and is anxious to get another to send east." The body parts were displayed in saloons, scalps sold for souvenirs. Denver celebrated, while on the plains, women and children froze to death, searching for shelter. But not everyone was celebrating. Captain Silas Soule wrote a letter to his commanding officer. I tell you, it was hard to see little children on their knees begging for mercy while having their brains beat out by men professing to be civilized. It was murder in every sense of the word. Word began to spread east. Newspapers in the East told a different story. The U.S. Congress launched investigations. Witnesses testified. Officers who had been there told the truth, and slowly the narrative shifted. What Chivington called a battle, the nation began to call a massacre. The Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War investigated. Their report was damning. It scarcely has its parallel in the records of Indian barbarity. Fleeing women holding up their hands and praying for mercy were brutally shot down. Infants were killed and scalped. Men were tortured and mutilated in a manner that would put to shame the most savage Indian. But by then, Chivington had already resigned. He would never face trial, and the victims would never see justice. In the weeks after Sand Creek, the surviving Cheyenne and Arapaho scattered across the plains. Families were shattered, children orphaned, entire lineages ended. Black Kettle, despite everything, continued to advocate for peace. He said, "Although wrongs have been done to me, I live in hopes." But not all survivors chose peace. Younger warriors, who had warned against trusting the white man, now had proof of betrayal. The massacre ignited the plains. Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors, along with Lakota and Dakota allies, launched raids across Colorado, Kansas, and Nebraska. They called it retaliation. The government called it war. This cycle of violence would continue for years. The Sand Creek Massacre became a rallying cry. Warriors like Roman Nose and the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers fought with renewed fury. And 4 years later, in 1868, Black Kettle, still seeking peace, would be killed at the Washita River Massacre, when George Armstrong Custer's troops attacked another peaceful village. As for the perpetrators, Chivington was forced to resign, but never prosecuted. He spent the rest of his life defending his actions, claiming Sand Creek was a legitimate military engagement. He died in 1994, never expressing remorse. Governor John Evans was forced to resign, but remained wealthy and influential. The soldiers who participated? Some expressed regret. Most did not. Many kept their souvenirs. Captain Silas Soule, the officer who refused to participate and testified against Chivington, was murdered on the streets of Denver in 1865, likely in retaliation. His testimony had been damning, his integrity costly, and his death ensured that many truths would die with him. But the story of Sand Creek would not be silenced. For over a century, the Sand Creek Massacre was downplayed, omitted from textbooks, or reframed as a battle. Many Americans never learned it happened, but the Cheyenne and Arapaho people never forgot. The trauma passed through generations, stories told by elders, pain carried in bloodlines. In 1998, Congress authorized the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. Descendants of survivors worked with the National Park Service to preserve the land and tell the true story. On April 28, 2007, the site officially opened, a 12,480-acre memorial in southeastern Colorado, marking the place where 230 people were slaughtered. In 2014, on the 150th anniversary, a ceremony was held. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper issued a formal apology. He said, "On behalf of the state of Colorado, I want to apologize. We should not have done this. It was wrong then, it is wrong now." Descendants of victims stood beside descendants of soldiers. Some wept, others embraced. It was a beginning, but not an ending. Because apologies, while meaningful, cannot restore what was lost. They cannot bring back the children, they cannot erase the trauma, and they cannot change the fact that this massacre was not an accident, it was policy. It was the result of systemic dehumanization. It was what happened when an entire people were seen as obstacles, not humans. The Sand Creek Massacre forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about American history, about who we celebrate as heroes, about what we're willing to forget, and about whether we've truly learned from our darkest chapters. Sand Creek was not an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern, a systematic campaign to remove indigenous peoples from their lands. From the Trail of Tears to Wounded Knee, from forced boarding schools to broken treaties, the story of Native American displacement is woven into the fabric of American expansion. The doctrine of manifest destiny, the belief that white Americans were destined to expand across the continent, justified countless atrocities. Indigenous peoples were portrayed as savages, obstacles to progress. Newspapers dehumanized them, politicians exploited fear, and men like Chivington became instruments of genocide. Today, the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes continue to thrive, but the scars remain. Poverty rates on reservations are disproportionately high. Health disparities persist. Cultural trauma is passed through generations, and every November 29th, descendants gather at Sand Creek to honor the victims and remember what was stolen. But there is also resilience. Native communities are reclaiming their languages, revitalizing cultural practices, and demanding acknowledgment. The Sand Creek descendants have ensured the massacre is taught in schools. Historians have recovered testimonies once buried, and slowly the full truth is being told. Sand Creek teaches us that history is not neutral. It's written by those with power, and when we ignore the voices of the marginalized, we allow atrocities to be rebranded as heroism. The question is, will we listen, will we remember, and will we do better? So what do we learn from Sand Creek? First, dehumanization is the foundation of atrocity. Before the massacre, newspapers called the Cheyenne vermin and beasts. Once a group is stripped of humanity in the public mind, violence becomes acceptable. This pattern repeats throughout history, from slavery to the Holocaust to modern conflicts. Second, following orders is not an excuse. Many soldiers at Sand Creek later claimed they were just obeying Chivington, but Captain Soule disobeyed and lived with his conscience intact. Moral courage means standing up even when it costs you, especially when it costs you. Third, silence is complicity. For decades, Americans knew about Sand Creek but chose to forget. We named streets after Chivington. We built monuments to pioneers without mentioning those they displaced. Every time we celebrate history without acknowledging its victims, we participate in erasure. Fourth, justice delayed is not justice. Chivington never faced trial. Survivors received no compensation. It took 133 years for Colorado to apologize, and even now, many Americans don't know Sand Creek happened. We cannot undo the past, but we can refuse to let it be forgotten. And finally, history is not behind us. It shapes our present. The systems that enabled Sand Creek, the racism, the land theft, the broken treaties, have lasting impacts. Reservations exist because of policies like these. Generational trauma exists because of massacres like this. To move forward, we must first face backward and acknowledge what was done. Let us remember their names. Not all can be spoken. Many records were never kept or were destroyed, but we know some. White Antelope, a chief who stood with arms folded, singing his death song as soldiers shot him. War Bonnet, who shielded children with his body. One Eye, Yellow Wolf, and countless others whose stories deserve to be told. We remember the mothers who died protecting their children, the children who never grew up, the elders who carried the wisdom of generations. They were not statistics, they were people. They had dreams, fears, loved ones. They felt pain, and they deserved to live.
Today, at the Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site, visitors can walk the land where the massacre occurred. They can see the monument erected by descendants. They can read the testimonies, and they can bear witness, which is the very least we owe the victims. The Cheyenne and Arapaho people are still here. They have survived genocide, forced relocation, cultural suppression, and systemic racism. Their resilience is extraordinary, and their demand is simple: remember, acknowledge, do better. The legacy of Sand Creek is a wound, yes, but it's also a testament to survival and a call to ensure it never happens again. If you've watched this far, you now know a story most Americans don't. You know that on November 29, 1864, the United States Army committed a war crime on its own soil, that a man of God became a murderer, that women and children were slaughtered under a flag of peace, and that for over a century this crime was minimized, justified, or forgotten. So the question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you share this story? Will you visit the memorial? Will you support indigenous communities fighting for recognition and justice today? Or will you let this story fade back into silence? Sand Creek matters because it reveals how easily atrocity becomes normalized, how fear can be weaponized, how good people can look away, and how history is sanitized to protect the powerful. But it also shows that truth, no matter how long buried, eventually emerges. Witnesses like Captain Soule risked everything to tell it. Survivors like Black Kettle refused to let it die, and descendants today carry the torch forward. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we remember it. We can teach it honestly. We can honor the victims, we can support indigenous sovereignty and rights, and we can commit to never again allowing dehumanization, fear, and ambition to justify mass violence. The Sand Creek Massacre was not just a tragedy, it was a test of our willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to listen to marginalized voices, and to hold our own nation accountable. 160 years later, the question remains, will we pass that test? The victims of Sand Creek cannot answer, but we can, and we must. Remember Sand Creek, honor the lost, and fight like hell to make sure it never happens again. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe for more untold histories, and never stop asking, what else haven't we been told?
Subscribe button, related videos, memorial information.